Welcome back to another Bible study. Today we are talking about Leviticus chapter 3 in 5 minutes. Free PDF that's linked down in the description. When did the events of Leviticus chapter 3 take place? Well, Leviticus picks up right where Exodus left off. That would place us about 1490 BC. The children of Israel are on their way from Egypt through the wilderness to the Canaan land. And we know that the tabernacle, the special tent that God's presence dwelt in among his people, that had been erected at this point. So that tells us it's at least about 1 year after the children of Israel left Egypt. I've only got one term to define in our definitions section. It's a very interesting one, the long lobe of the liver. We are going to talk about this a little bit later on in the chapter. And I had to do a little anatomy research in order to figure out what this was. So the liver in humans and in animals is made up of lobes. For example, a cow's liver has 4 lobes, the right, left, caudate, and quadrate. So there you go. And the number of lobes depends on the type of animal. So you're probably wondering, how on earth does that come into play in this chapter? Well, let's talk about it as we go through our breakdown. Our first section is going to be verses 1 through 5. We're going to talk about peace offerings. Specifically in this section, peace offerings that were made with animals from the herd, i.e. cows. So in the first couple chapters, we have been introduced to grain offerings and burnt offerings. This chapter is going to introduce us to a new one, peace offerings, and to tell us how that was supposed to be done. If an Israelite man wanted to offer a peace offering using an animal from his herd, he was to bring either a male or a female without blemish to the tabernacle. He was then to put his hand on the head of that animal before killing it. The priests were supposed to collect its blood and to throw that blood against the bronze altar, or the altar of burnt offering. We're told that from this peace offering, the, quote, fat covering the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver were to be burnt up on the bronze altar as a food offering to God. So that is how the long lobe of the liver comes into play in chapter 3. Then in verses 6 through 11, we talk about what this offering was supposed to look like if an individual wanted to offer a peace offering with a lamb. So if an Israelite man brought a lamb to be offered as a peace offering, the same procedures were supposed to be followed, with the exception that a slightly different portion was to be burnt on the bronze altar. So this is largely the same. You see this quite a bit in Leviticus, where you have very similar offerings that are described twice, and it can become a little bit repetitive. From the peace offering, the priests were supposed to offer a food offering of, quote, this is in regards to the lamb, keep in mind, the whole fat tail, cut off close to the backbone, and the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. So if you want to bring your lamb to be sacrificed, this is how you do it. And then finally, a peace offering made with a goat. Verses 12 through 16. If an Israelite man brought a goat to be offered as a peace offering, he was to bring the animal to the tabernacle, put his hand on the head of the animal before killing it. The priest would take the goat's blood and then throw it against the altar of burnt offering. The, quote, fat covering the entrails and all of the fat that is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins and the long lobe of the liver were to, once again, be burnt on the altar as a food offering to God. So that is that is Leviticus chapter 3. And just if you weren't with us for the last couple chapters, there is a diagram of the tabernacle where you can see this altar where so much blood was being thrown and the other important items in the tabernacle structure. And now for our application. The peace offering is described in more detail in Leviticus chapter 7, verses 11 through 21. And we'll get there eventually if you don't want to run over there and read all of that now. It was not an offering that was supposed to be made to make peace with God after sinning. That's the sin offering, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. Rather, it was an offering of praise or of thanksgiving for an individual already having peace with God. Now, we no longer offer animal sacrifices as worship or as thanksgiving to God, but that doesn't mean that there's no place in our lives for worship and for thanksgiving. We offer sacrifices to God through our obedience and through our words. Hebrews, which is a book in the New Testament, chapter 13, verse 5 says this: "Through him," or through Jesus, then, "let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of our lips, that acknowledge his name." So our continual acknowledgement of Jesus as our Savior, thanksgiving poured out to him for his grace in saving us, those are our offerings. This practice should be present in our everyday lives individually, and this is also part of the reason that Christians meet congregationally and collectively to worship God together.